Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Huo Yuhao almost vomited blood. This is a conspiracy. This is such a devious plot. He could clearly smell a conspiracy, and it was a conspiracy indeed. He had just found Donga, Tang Wutong, yesterday, and today's test was so incredibly difficult. They were even using Tang Wutong to threaten him. So treacherous. This is just too treacherous. Elder Xian, are you sure that's right? Teacher Wang Yang and senior sister Han Ruoruo. Huo Yuhao tried to talk back. Elder Xian said casually, after they got together. Han Ruoruo immediately took her graduation test and passed it. She's now a teacher in the academy, so there's no problem with her status. You can do the same if you pass the graduation test. Huo Yuhao was as gloomy as ever. Then is my test the same as senior sister Han? Elder Xian maintained his casual tone as he said, why do you keep asking such foolish questions, child? What is our academy's mission? To nurture monsters, not normal people, right? Since that's the case, won't our students receive different graduation tests? Graduation tests for the inner courtyard's students are different for every person, don't you know that? Therefore, your test is definitely different from Han Ruoruo's test. Zhong Lishuan nodded and said, know how to be content, Yuhao. The academy is already being very lenient towards you. You have a long time limit for this assessment, so you don't have to be too greedy. You can just complete this test within 3 years. The corner of Huo Yuhao's mouth twitched. Eldest senior sister, have the contents of my graduation test been reviewed and changed impromptu? Why don't I just take the original 7 assignments? Zhong Lishuan replied grandly, yes, the test has been changed. We reviewed and changed the test last night. You have already displayed the strength of an 8-ring soul master, and your 8 rings are extraordinary. How can a normal assessment satisfy our requirements for this test? Huo Yuhao was full of regret, and his regret was already turning his insides green. Why did I flex? Now, my test is truly very difficult. Huo Yuhao laughed bitterly and said, but there's no way I can complete this test. You know how difficult it is to craft a Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell, Din Xian, so how can you give me such a difficult task? That's just too difficult. And, Din Yang, you're a rank 97 Transcendent Doluor, and I've just passed rank 80. There's still an insurmountable gap between the two of us. I don't think I can reach your rank even after 30 years, not to mention 3. Yang Xiaozhi smiled faintly and said, that's enough, stop trying to undervalue yourself. How can I not know your abilities? You're most adept at creating miracles, and as for reaching rank 97 after 30 years, I don't think you'll need that long. Alright, why don't I give you some leeway? Don't you have martial soul fusion skills with Tang Wutong? My test shall allow you two to team up in battle. Consider your task completed if the two of you can team up and defeat me together. Xian Lina nodded and said, then I shall give you some leeway as well. Don't you have Xian Zuan, that Class 9 soul engineer in the Tang sect? Why don't we do it this way? You can team up with him, and he's allowed to help you. The two of you shall craft 2 Class 9 stationary soul cannon shells for the academy, and then you can consider your task completed. That's extortion. That's just pure extortion of labor. Huo Yuhao wanted to cry and break down. But he had just found Tang Wutong again, and his mood was just too good. He wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Elder Xian pulled a generous face and said, since everyone has decided to be lenient, then I shall as well. Before you complete your test within 3 years, I shall allow you to be together with Tang Wutong temporarily. But if you can't complete your tasks within 3 years, don't blame me for breaking you two apart. Huo Yuhao's face turned black. Is there much of a difference between you being lenient or not? Is there? Is there? Yang Xiaozhi grinned and said, youngsters have to be confident in themselves. This is considered both pressure and motivation for you. Originally, we didn't intend to give you so much pressure, but now that you've gotten together with Wutong, you must be in a very good mood. So that pressure must be liberated quite a bit. We can't progress without no pressure at all. Since your original pressure has been lifted, then we will naturally give you pressure again, so that we can avoid you not being focused or not putting in effort. Brutal. Huo Yuhao couldn't say anything to argue. The academy had been teaching and helping him over so many years, so that he could gradually become one of the elites of the younger generation. Now, the academy wanted to give him trouble for his graduation assessment and give him pressure. What could he say? Huo Yuhao's face was as black as could be, and his expression was full of helplessness. Tang Wutong squeezed his hand. Huo Yuhao turned to Tang Wutong as she smiled and said, Dean Yang is right, having pressure isn't a bad thing. You're not the only one who needs to work hard. I have to as well. We can work hard together. 3 years isn't considered a long time, but it isn't too short. Tang Wutong's encouragement was much more effective for Huo Yuhao than any mystical pill. He took a deep breath and turned back to his various elders as he nodded and replied, All right. I will definitely give my all to pass this graduation test. Elder Xian grinned and said, That's right. Don't worry, during the time that you're cultivating, the academy won't assign any extra tasks to you. As for your final assessment, we will determine that according to your circumstance and the situation on the continent. You just have to work hard on cultivating when you go back. Your trip to the Heavenly Soul Empire's front lines has dealt a heavy blow to the Sun Moon Empire. You've ruined one of their Soul Engineer legions, and killed an evil titled Doluo. That must be quite a blow to them. The Sun Moon Empire shouldn't make any large movements for a while. News from the front lines has told us that the Sun Moon Empire's Empress, who's known as the Sun Moon Valkyrie, is pregnant, and she shouldn't be placing herself at the front lines for a while. That should give us enough time to prepare and gather ourselves. The Sun Moon Valkyrie is pregnant. Huo Yuhao trembled a little as he heard those words. Of course, he knew who the Sun Moon Valkyrie was referring to. A feeling that was hard to describe rose from his heart. His relationship with Juzi was vague and difficult to understand, but they were definitely not enemies. Back then, when he and her were together at the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy, he still didn't know that Donga was a girl. Juzi could be said to be the first girl that had touched his heart. Afterwards, because of their respective identities and statuses, and also because of the target that Juzi had set for herself, they slowly drifted apart until they met again on the battlefield. Juzi remarked that Huo Yuhao was soft-hearted, but the truth was, how could she not be soft-hearted when facing him? Huo Yuhao couldn't develop any kind of belligerence or unfriendliness towards her. Juzi is pregnant. The Sun Moon Empire's emperor, Shu Qianran's child. Even though Huo Yuhao knew that they didn't share that kind of sentiment or relationship anymore, he still couldn't help but feel a little sour and bitter inside. Perhaps it was normal for a guy to feel like that. Elders, since the graduation test is like that, then I'm going to hurry back and work hard. Huo Yuhao laughed helplessly as he turned to leave. Don't be in such a hurry, Elder Xian stopped him. Eh? Huo Yuhao glanced at Elder Xian confusedly. Elder Xian continued, Look, us elderly men have gathered for you. That's not easy. Furthermore, we can't let you make this trip for nothing. As the saying goes, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, then you will always emerge victorious. I'm afraid you don't really understand Xiaozhe's abilities. Why don't the two of you have a practice battle with Xiaozhe? First, so that we can see exactly how powerful the two of you are, and second, this will be a good chance for you to understand Xiaozhe's abilities. In that case, you will have a target or guidelines for your subsequent cultivation. A practice battle with our dean, Yang Xiaozhe. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong exchanged a look. Who was Yang Xiaozhe? He was the dean of Shrek Academy's Martial Soul Department, and he was the previous master of the Sea Gods Pavilion, Mu Yan's eldest disciple. In some sense, he was still Huo Yuhao's senior brother, and he was also a rank 97 Transcendent Doluo. Yang Xiaozhe's strength could be ranked within the top 5 in Shrek Academy, and his Radiant Phoenix also possessed some extremely mystical abilities. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong had just recently attained their 8th soul rings, and in terms of strength, perhaps not even 10 of them could match Yang Xiaozhe. However, that was before considering their martial soul fusion skills. The truth was, the elders of the Sea Gods Pavilion had opened a conference overnight yesterday, so that they could talk about Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's martial soul fusion skills. Of course, these elders wouldn't give Huo Yuhao trouble just because they had nothing better to do. The reason why they had decided on these 3 incredibly difficult assessments was after they considered things in the long term. These graduation assessments were meant to be difficult not because they wanted to give him trouble, but because they wanted him to spend more time cultivating hard in the academy and at the Tang sect. The elders could see Shrek Academy's immensely glorious future from Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's 4 martial soul fusion skills. These 2 soul masters were both considered top-tier soul masters, and they could unleash 4 different martial soul fusion skills. That meant that once they became title Doluo, they might be able to fight against an ultimate Doluo. Shrek Academy was still weaker in terms of overall strength compared to the Holy Ghost Church, and the only thing they could rely on was the Academy's foundations accumulated over 10,000 years, in addition to the complicated relationships between the Dragon Emperor Doluo, Long Xiaoyao, the Death God Doluo, Yi Shishui, and the Dragon God Doluo, Mu Yen. But if the Sun Moon Empire wanted to conquer the entire continent in the future, they couldn't possibly wrap around Shrek Academy. They would meet on the battlefield at some point. The Academy was definitely at a disadvantage in terms of fighting strength at the highest level. Even though Shrek Academy and the Great Star Do Forest's soul beasts had an intimate relationship, when push came to shove, the beast god Di Qian would never make a move for Shrek Academy. Not to mention the fact that Shrek Academy had dealt severe losses to the soul beasts during that beast invasion. Huge losses to both human parties were beneficial for the world of soul beasts. That meant the soul beasts couldn't possibly help Shrek Academy in any way. Given these problems, Shrek Academy was desperately in need of outstanding individuals who were capable of countering the upper echelon of the Holy Ghost Church. Although Elder Xian was only a single step away from becoming an ultimate Doluo, he clearly knew how difficult it was to the step to rank 99. As for Yang Xiaozhe and Xian Lina, they were still very far from becoming ultimate Doluo, despite already being transcendent Doluo. They weren't the only ones that were far away either. Every soul master within Shrek Academy shared this situation. As things stood, what could they do in the face of an ultimate Doluo? Contrary to expectations, an opportunity had presented itself in the younger generation of soul masters. Honestly speaking, it was impossible for Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong to become transcendent Doluo any time soon. However, there was still something special about them. Yesterday, all of the Sea Gods Pavilion's elders had been astonished by the strength of their unleashed fusion skills. With their strength, how acute were their senses? The instant that each skill was unleashed, they'd been able to clearly sense that both Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's abilities had increased to the point that it left all of them shocked. This was definitely not something normally achievable by an 8-ringed soul Doluo. Both Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were extremely talented. Furthermore, their fusion skills were the foundation for miracles. As a result of this, the Academy had considered their options, before deciding that they would do everything in their power to help the pair improve their abilities. They would be the key to dealing with the Holy Ghost Church in the near future. Naturally, Huo Yuhao didn't know the elders' intentions. To him, Yang Xiaozhe was simply here present to test their fighting strength. Of course, this was also part of the elders' plans. The aura released by their fusion skills was one thing, but the strength they contained was another. With sufficient pressure, they would either collapse, or demonstrate an even greater level of strength. Every single elder of Shrek Academy was a research expert, with many years of teaching experience. They all wanted to see just how much Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong would improve from this fight, as well as how much help they could offer to the pair. Tang Wutong nodded at Huo Yuhao. Her gaze became sharper, and her strong belief flowed through his body alongside their Haodong power. The name of this belief was Victory. Even though she knew how difficult such a feat would be, she was still determined to win. This was one of the qualities that a truly strong individual should possess. Tang Wutong and Huo Yuhao had rekindled their knowledge of one another. She wasn't just his girlfriend, but his teammate and partner as well. Once, they'd fought side by side not long after entering the academy. 10 years later, today, they were still side by side, yet they now had the ability to challenge the dean of Shrek's martial soul department. How could they not be excited? Once he sensed Tang Wutong's strong fighting intent, Huo Yuhao's initially depressed emotions were wiped away. I've already promised to protect her. Since she's so intent on winning, how could I cower away? He rapidly circulated his soul power and interlinked it with Tang Wutong's, their Haodong power fusing once again. He discovered that a part of Tang Wutong's soul power had been filtered out, and that this portion was contained within the sunray pattern of the golden trident on her forehead. Without that portion of her soul power, she was like the old Wang Donga. Her martial soul was still the radiant butterfly goddess. Huo Yuhao didn't have any idea what that portion of her strength was. However, it was evident that it was of a higher standard than his own soul power. Initially, their martial souls hadn't been able to fuse due to this portion of her soul power. This had been why there'd been so many misunderstandings. Huo Yuhao knew that Tang Wutong's fighting strength would be somewhat affected if she didn't use that portion of her soul power. However, this was two-sided, as it also meant that their Haodong power could finally fuse. This was also what they were relying on to challenge Yang Xiaozhe. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong looked at each other before nodding. A strong aura emerged from both of them, while the will to win appeared in both of their eyes as they grasped each other's hand. Currently, the feeling that they gave off was as if they were both the same entity. When he sensed the strong fighting intent coming from them, Yang Xiaozhe nodded and smiled. Very good. Let's head to the practice arena. Just do your best. Everyone followed Yang Xiaozhe to the practice arena, which turned out to be the same place that Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong had been at together yesterday. Besides the three of them, everyone else stood around the perimeter. Meanwhile, a few of the elders, led by Elder Xian, set up restrictions around the arena. Soon afterwards, a giant barrier engulfed the arena. This practice arena had been constructed atop a mountain. When the restrictions were finished being constructed, they appeared very striking. The dim yellow glow of the barrier engulfed the entirety of the mountaintop. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong held each other's hand as they stood opposite Yang Xiaozhe. Their soul power interlinked as it flowed, and their Haodong power surged. Huo Yuhao's physical strength exceeded others of the same rank, even after he'd gained his 8th soul ring. With the manifold mysterious ice essence, life's gold, and the dragon pill that Long Xiaoyao had given him, he wasn't affected much despite how vigorous their Haodong power was. Right now, Huo Yuhao simply felt like the soul power inside of him was surging. At times, it felt like whirlpools would appear. His purely fluid soul power was extremely pure, in fact, there were no impurities in it at all. When such strong soul power flowed into Tang Wutong's body, she didn't seem to feel uncomfortable at all either. Evidently, she was also strong enough to handle it. Their soul powers were completely compatible. The fusion of their fighting strength was more than them just adding their fighting strength together. Their auras quickly rose, after which their strong fighting intent surged towards Yang Xiaozhe and suppressed him. Yang Xiaozhe smiled, and his body exuded a golden glow. Suddenly, the air within 10 square meters of him started to ripple. It was as if was being baked by a strong fire. Under such a situation, Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's immense fighting intent couldn't directly locate Yang Xiaozhe's body, and could only remain suspended in the air. Come, little juniors. Show me how strong you two can get once you've fused your martial souls. Yang Xiaozhe's voice echoed. Following this, a sonorous phoenix roar shook the sky, and an aura that had been repressed earlier was suddenly unleashed. A strong intent suddenly collided with Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's fighting intent. Suddenly, the air of the practice arena became extremely violent. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's clothes creaked as they were blown about, but neither retreated. Huo Yuhao released a golden glow from his body, while a blue glow emerged from Tang Wutong's. The two glows then intersected and fused with one another, before spreading outwards and disintegrating the strong intent that Yang Xiaozhe had unleashed. Elder Xian and the others from Shrek nodded slightly when they saw this. After fusing their martial souls, Huo Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were already as strong a titled Doluo. Furthermore, they weren't simply as strong as a normal titled Doluo. Else, they wouldn't have been able to hold their ground against a rank 97 transcendent Doluo. Promising talents, promising talents. If they both become titled Doluo in the future, they might just stand a chance against an ultimate Doluo together. Elder Xian nodded in satisfaction after he thought this. Next up, it was time to see how effective their skills were in a real fight. Under sufficient pressure, their fighting strength would definitely be fully unleashed. Huo Yuhao was the first to make a move, as a rose-gold vertical eye slowly opened on his forehead. When facing someone like Yang Xiaozhe, how could he afford to hold back? He'd immediately decided to use his strongest ability, the Eye of Destiny. As his Eye of Destiny opened, a strong light flashed, and layers of blinding light filled the air. Afterwards, the circulation of all energy bodies around him seemed to slow down, and both Tang Wutong and his bodies started to become illusory. This was his spiritual interference domain. Not only that, but Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection engulfed the entire practice arena like a web, and he shared it with Tang Wutong. Given his current spiritual prowess, and the small range he was focusing on, he was able to see everything in the practice arena in minute detail. Even though Yang Xiaozhe had concealed himself, Huo Yuhao was able to immediately locate him the moment that he fully unleashed his spiritual detection. His spiritual power was already at the standard for a titled Doluo. Furthermore, only a spiritual type titled Doluo could compare to him in terms of spiritual power, as his spiritual power had reached the concrete material realm. 7 soul rings shone from his body, while 8 flashed from Tang Wutong's. Since only 7 soul rings were present, it meant that Huo Yuhao was currently using his spirit eyes, rather than that his 8-ringed ice jade Emperor Scorpion. His 4th soul ring flashed, after which a whirlpool-shaped glow appeared above Yang Xiaozhe. It was Huo Yuhao's spiritual confusion. Huo Yuhao had long ago thought of a fighting strategy for Yang Xiaozhe. If he wanted to overcome him and emerge victorious, his only option was to take the initiative. Only through assaulting and controlling Yang Xiaozhe could he prevent this rank 97 transcendent Doluo from unleashing his full abilities. They would only stand a chance if that happened. That was why Huo Yuhao had immediately used his spiritual interference domain to protect Tang Wutong and himself initially. Afterwards, he'd used his spiritual confusion to overpower Yang Xiaozhe and control him. His spiritual confusion was a single-target control-type soul skill. While it was only his spirit eye's 4th soul skill, it was the strongest and most effective soul skill he had when it came to controlling a single person. Yang Xiaozhe's body turned slightly rigid when he was struck by Huo Yuhao's spiritual confusion, and a slightly lost look appeared in his eyes for an instant. At that moment, Huo Yuhao's vertical eye lit up, and a blinding, rose-gold light shot out. This time, it was his spiritual shock. The spiritual shock from his Eye of Destiny might not be as strong as it was when he was in his martial soul true body, but it could be used quickly. There was no accumulation needed. However, Huo Yuhao didn't expect Yang Xiaozhe to suddenly take half a step forwards despite suffering from his spiritual confusion. Afterwards, his body turned entirely golden, and a golden phoenix opened its wings behind him. Yang Xiaozhe seemed to have safely entered his own world. When Huo Yuhao's spiritual shock struck him, Huo Yuhao felt as if his attack had struck nothing but air. At the same time, though, it didn't quite feel as if the air it had struck was completely empty. However, the full strength of his spiritual shock wasn't completely unleashed due to this. It was the first time that Huo Yuhao had seen something like this. He'd only seen Yang Xiaozhe exude a golden ring of light from his body, before returning to normal, despite his body being in a momentary state of shock. This was Yang Xiaozhe's realm. It was similar to Elder Mu's Sovereign's Descent. However, Yang Xiaozhe's realm wasn't the same as Sovereign's Descent. Yang Xiaozhe's own understanding was blended into it, something that belonged solely to him. How could the chief disciple of the dragon god Doluo Mu En be so easily defeated? Huo Yuhao's immense spiritual shock had been blocked, just like that. Huo Yuhao was the one left somewhat shocked instead. However, Huo Yuhao wasn't the only one who'd attacked. Tang Wutong had made her move, too. The radiant butterfly goddess wings opened up behind her back as her soul rings rose. When Huo Yuhao used his spiritual shock, Tang Wutong had mimed a lifting action. Afterwards, a golden hexagram array had accurately appeared beneath Yang Xiaozhe's feet. Tang Wutong had calculated everything precisely. Even if Yang Xiaozhe managed to block Huo Yuhao's spiritual shock, he'd still be affected by it and the spiritual confusion he'd previously been struck with. He wouldn't be able to avoid her hexagram array then. Even though the part of her memory that belonged to Wang Donga had only been restored for a short period of time, her coordination with Huo Yuhao seemed to come extremely naturally. Whenever their Haodong power reappeared, their chemistry reappeared alongside it. Just as Tang Wutong had expected, Yang Xiaozhe wasn't completely fine despite managing to resist Huo Yuhao's spiritual shock. When the intense golden light from the hexagram array engulfed his body, he wasn't able to escape from the spot he was standing at. Huo Yuhao's sixth soul ring suddenly lit up as he did so. At the same time, the vertical eye on his forehead instantly changed from rose gold to black and white. Even Elder Xian and those sitting outside of the arena shuddered when they saw this black and white vertical eye. A sense of crisis almost instantly appeared in everyone's heads. What soul skill was this? Everyone from Shrek Academy was already very clear in regards to Huo Yuhao's abilities. They knew that he was strong, but they didn't know that he could unleash a skill capable of making everyone present feel as if they were in a crisis. What kind of soul skill is that it can do this? Of course, Huo Yuhao wouldn't answer that. However, when his soul ring lit up, Tang Wutong was momentarily taken aback, as she held his hand, and she subconsciously turned around to stare at him. A complicated look flashed through her eyes. There were some disconnected memories in her mind, besides those that belonged to Wang Donga, her childhood, and what happened afterwards. Those pieces belonged to Wang Chua. Currently, Huo Yuhao was using the soul skills that Wang Chua had bestowed upon him, spiritual dispossession and destiny's demise. A black and white beam of light suddenly struck out across the sky, instantly striking Yang Xiaozhe, who'd been hit with the hexagon array. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were the only ones who could see this black and white beam. The only thing the people spectating their battle could see was his eye of destiny, which had turned black and white, flashing faintly, and the air around them contorting slightly. Yang Xiaozhe felt chills run down his spine, while goosebumps broke out all over his body as a cold that chilled him to the bone coursed through his body. He was a transcendent Doluo, and his senses were extremely sensitive. Such a sinister change gave him a rude shock. What kind of power was that? It didn't contain any offensive effects, but why does it make me feel so alarmed? Tang Wutong used her next soul skill immediately after Huo Yuhao was finished. Her second soul ring flickered, after which all the golden spots on her wings unleashed spheres of golden lights that blasted towards Yang Xiaozhe. Yang Xiaozhe was surrounded by intense golden flames at this moment, and stepped out of her hexagon array. It was extremely difficult for Tang Wutong to hurt him with her soul skills considering the difference in their strength. Yang Xiaozhe waved his right hand through the air, and a strange layer of golden light blanketed the sky. Tang Wutong's light of the butterfly goddess disappeared into nothingness. However, the sense of danger that had given him goosebumps before was still present. What was that, exactly? Strong doubts surfaced in his mind, but he didn't dare to hold back due to the sense of danger he felt. He took another step back and punched out towards Huo Yuhao. It appeared that he was just simply throwing a punch through the air, but the entire sparring arena changed intensely as this punch charged forwards. At least, that was what Huo Yuhao could sense. Huo Yuhao felt as if the space surrounding the punch had collapsed. Formidable restrictive forces pressed down on him from all directions, and squeezed him so hard that he almost couldn't breathe. This was clearly just a punch through the air, but he felt like the fist had appeared in front of him in an instant, and it was akin to an enormous, majestic mountain hurtling towards him in an unstoppable manner. This wasn't a soul skill. Rather, it was Yang Xiaozhe's self-invented skill, a perfectly fused and formidable soul skill where he'd combined all the energies and forces within his body. Huo Yuhao almost subconsciously wanted to use his 3 ultimate Haodong skills. Of his self-invented soul skills, he rarely used the Goddess of Light, as it wasn't as formidable as his 3 ultimate Haodong skills. Furthermore, using the goddess of light, after Dong vanished would immediately trigger his yearning for her. However, the moment he attempted to focus and unleash his 3 ultimate Haodong skills, his entire being froze a little. A long time had passed since he'd invented his 3 ultimate Haodong skills, thus he was extremely familiar with how they were used. He could perfectly fuse his emotions, soul power, and spiritual power to attain powerful effects. Theoretically, his 3 ultimate Haodong skills should become even stronger with Haodong power supporting him. However, when he attempted to unleash them, he realized with a sense of shock that he couldn't use them anymore. This was a matter of ability, he simply couldn't reach the emotional state required anymore. The 3 ultimate Haodong skills were the Fist of Remembrance, which contained a feeling of resurgence, the Sword of Longing, which would never be forgotten, and finally, the Haodong Palm, which would last for eternity. Every strike was based on, and completed, through his intense thoughts and yearning for Dong. Huo Yuhao had to first channel intense longing for Dong when he used his 3 ultimate Haodong skills, before he could unleash them naturally. But at this moment, Tang Wutong, who was also Wang Dong, was right next to him. With his lover right beside him, how could there be any longing? Just as he'd considered back then, his 3 ultimate Haodong skills had become ineffective now that he'd found Dong again. Reality had proved his hypothesis, and he found that he could no longer use his 3 ultimate Haodong skills. That moment of hesitation was enough for Yang Xiaozhe's attack to arrive in front of him. Tang Wutong and Huo Yuhao had fused their soul power, thus the 2 of them were acting as one. As such, Tang Wutong was the first to realize that something was wrong with Huo Yuhao. She basically didn't hesitate to take a step forwards and block for him. She raised her right hand over her head, and her 8th soul ring flashed. Her entire body began to glow alongside the light of her blood-red soul ring. She began to radiate a brilliant gold that carried circle after circle of bluish hues. She was like a small sun, with countless blue butterflies waltzing around her. Intense bluish gold colors transformed into an enormous pillar of light that met Yang Xiaozhe's fist. When they met, an intense explosion occurred, making the entire sparring arena tremble. The various elders who were maintaining the protective dome had to inject more power into it in order to ensure that they blocked all of the explosive soul power undulations inside. Yang Xiaozhe emerged from the explosion, while Tang Wutong stumbled backwards and fell into Huo Yuhao's embrace. The absolute gap in their strength had caused all the color to drain from her pretty face. Even though she hadn't been heavily injured, the soul power in her body had been riled up, and ripples from their Haodong power meant she and Huo Yuhao could feel their blood surging. Meanwhile, a look of surprise had appeared in Yang Xiaozhe's eyes. Tang Wutong's attack hadn't been that simple. Even though he'd gained the upper hand, Yang Xiaozhe could still feel his soul power trembling after clashing with her. He had to expend quite a bit of spiritual power to get his soul power back under control. That concussive power. Yang Xiaozhe was the dean of Shrek Academy's martial soul department, and had spent his entire life investigating different kinds of soul skills. He could immediately tell what was so frightening about the soul skill that Tang Wutong had just used. If it wasn't for his absolute advantage in terms of cultivation, and the fact that Tang Wutong didn't seem very familiar with this soul skill, the outcome could have been quite different. Yang Xiaozhe was a rank 97 Transcendent Doluo, while Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong could only barely reach rank 90 with their Haodong power. However, because their martial souls were very powerful, and because there were 2 of them, their rank 90 was more formidable than typical title Doluo. But in the end, the gap between them was just too large. There was an insurmountable gap between a title Doluo and a Transcendent Doluo. If both parties had the same level of soul power, if Tang Wutong had gained the upper hand, then the soul skill that she had just used would have been extremely terrifying with its full strength unleashed. It had a high temperature, it contained the element of light, and it was very powerful. These 3 different elements were then combined, their degree of fusion comparable to that of a self-invented soul skill. Yang Xiaozhe seemed like he defended against the attack easily. However, the truth was, while he was very powerful, he was also adept with the element of light. His radiant phoenix possessed light and heat as 2 of its most salient characteristics, thus he had a natural resistance when defending against Tang Wutong's attack. But what if someone else had been her opponent? the situation would probably have had an entirely different outcome. She fell gently, but Huo Yuhao felt an intense heartache. Tang Wutong had forcibly taken this hit for him because of his error, so how could he not be upset with himself for his mistake? Huo Yuhao subconsciously wrapped his arms around Tang Wutong's slim waist, his 3 eyes simultaneously bursting with light. His will to fight had truly been ignited. Huo Yuhao took a deep breath, before grabbing Tang Wutong with one hand and slowly raised his other. His 7 soul rings suddenly became 8, and an intense blizzard rapidly descended upon the sparring arena. The temperature of the arena fell to an extremely low degree almost instantaneously, and Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong disappeared within the blizzard. The Snow Empress 3 ultimate techniques, the Empress Sword, the Empress Palm, and the Empress Chill. This was a fusion of the Empress Chill and his domain of perpetual ice into his snowy dance of ultimate ice. After absorbing the manifold mysterious ice essence, the temperatures that Huo Yuhao's ultimate ice could reach were much more terrifying than before. Su Tong's martial soul was an ice sky snow lady, and was also a martial soul with ultimate ice, but she was still a far cry from Huo Yuhao in terms of how cold she could make her ultimate ice. It was why she'd immediately admitted defeat, after seeing Huo Yuhao freeze the entire surface of the Sea God's Lake. A temperature more than 200 degrees below zero permeated the entire sparring arena, almost instantly, and even Yang Xiaozhi shivered, despite his cultivation. The advantage that ultimate martial souls held became increasingly obvious as their cultivation increased. Yang Xiaozhi's martial was the Radiant Phoenix, and was adept with both light and fire. At the very least, Huo Yuhao's ultimate ice could counter his element of fire. No matter how profound or wild his Radiant Phoenix martial was, the flames that his martial soul granted him contained the fire of light, not ultimate fire. As such, he didn't have an advantage against Huo Yuhao's ultimate ice. Yang Xiaozhi's grew serious for the first time. He could feel that Huo Yuhao was fully concentrated at this point. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't be afraid of Huo Yuhao, who was still a child in his eyes. However, that feeling of danger from before still hadn't disappeared and seemed to be plaguing him. This made him a little more careful, as the unknown was the most frightening. Blazing phoenix flames erupted out from Yang Xiaozhi. What he wanted to do was very simple. In Shrek Academy's lessons about Soul Master battles, there was a class about advantage. The first thing that Soul Masters had to do when battling each other was unleash their respective strengths and advantages, as much as possible to suppress their opponent. What was Yang Xiaozhi's greatest advantage against Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong? His soul power. There was an insurmountable gap in their ranks of soul power. This video will end here.